So good evening, everybody, and welcome to, or are we still waiting for Karthik to give us the word that we're connected, or are we live?
We're not live yet, Mrs. Lofton. Give me like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Karthik, I did just get a notice that we are streaming live on YouTube.
Yep, we just streamed live. We are live now. We are live.
Good to go, Judy.
Okay, it's me. It's me.
Oh, okay. You're going to kick us off. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to pull up the agenda for you, Mrs. Lofton. My apologies. So
Okay.
here we are with the agenda.
Oh, no worries. So welcome everybody this evening to this evening's Finance Committee meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Russell, I'm not sure, is Lori Widener on with us, or are you doing attendance?
She is not on, so I will take attendance this evening.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Have we received any public comments for the Finance Committee meeting?
We have not.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 2 on the Finance Committee agenda, and we will be looking at, I'm sorry, it's so small, I can't, estimated costs associated with opening PVSD schools under COVID. Thank you, Dr. Russell. Grant funding to offset these costs, and then we'll have some discussion. So
You don't have to do attendance first?
Oh, Dr. Russell's, usually you just write it down. We don't really.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, we're not as formal usually in the committees, real. Okay, so I'll turn it over. I guess, is it Jim, are you going to be leading us through this discussion?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Weaver, the floor is all yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Lofton. Hello, everybody. So tonight's agenda is kind of plain and simple, yet there is an awful lot of information in here associated with options with the reopening of school in the fall and potential estimated costs associated with what we do from a schedule standpoint. We did a lot of heavy lifting from January through June. We had ourselves a budget approval June 29th, and we're off and running from a fiscal year perspective July 1st, 2020. So we'll move into some different estimated costs. Keep in mind that this is kind of a 30,000 foot view. As you are well aware of, there are many different options and many different ideas as we move towards potentially opening up school in the fall. Keep in mind that many of these costs are not budgeted in the 2020-2021 general fund budget that we just passed. And we are trying to mold these conversations into three potential scenarios, which is the traditional, which is students attend in person, hybrid, which is a combination of on-site, in-person, and virtual learning, and in the unfortunate circumstances where it's virtual as well, and that all students will be participating from a virtual standpoint. A lot of these costs have been focused in on estimates that we've gone out and said, hey, what if we do X, Y, and Z? Let's get some concrete numbers. Some of the numbers are a little bit easier for us to start with. So staffing, for instance, we know that in our budget that we just passed, we had very limited additional staff, if any, associated with outgoing true-up costs and what it is that we maintained in our budget moving forward with unfilled positions. So just to be clear, we do have salaries and benefits that total $78,730,193 of our $112 million budget. It's important for us to continue to go back to that base as we look at the overall estimated costs moving forward. The conversation tonight really deals around additional staffing that we are going through the processes, depending upon the schedules and the scenarios that we want to utilize and look at. What additional staff will we need? So in order to do that and to have some examples, we've developed some rates based upon, just like we do for a normal budget conversation throughout the years. We have identified teachers, for instance, if we need a teacher at master step 1 or step 1 column 1, custodians at an average cost, a starting cost, those types of things. And remember, depending upon the different levels of discussion and where we ultimately end up, those salaries and benefits may adjust. So for instance, if we talk about psychologists, which we will in a couple of minutes, the cost for a psychologist, because of their credentials and certifications, obviously will cost us more than it would for a custodian, for instance. And so we need to keep that in mind as we continue to build what these potential scenarios look like. So if we move forward, here is a quick synopsis of what we are internally using as we develop these costs. You see the salaries, you see the benefits, and we're not going to really get into, at this particular level, we get 50% reimbursement for FICA and PSERS benefits. That gets a little confusing. The board is well aware how that works. And when we come down to final concrete numbers, we can get into that. But for our 30,000 foot view tonight, we just left it in at gross. Custodian, teacher at a master step 1, school psychologist, and special ed behavioral analyst. Again, as we get into the conversations and the conversations that I've gleaned over the past couple of days, for instance, in the policy committee, and in last night's good conversation about what we may need, those dollar figures for those particular individuals, because some of those individuals will be in high demand. So for instance, I would imagine school psychologists, especially since CDC guidance and other guidance is coming out and saying, hey, we need some additional mental health personnel, school psychologists on site to help our students and staff reacclimate themselves after this unprecedented time, and to be able to come back in and to be right so that they can learn as much as they possibly can, whatever the program may look like. Same with the special education behavior analyst, specific to those very important needs for those children of special needs as well. And they have to be handled a little bit differently, which we all know. So I just went into a little bit about the school psychologist, and that many of the studies that we are looking at, and the board members are on top of these things, quoting and utilizing the Pediatrics, American Association of Pediatrics, CDC, all the different guidelines and PDE that are coming out or are already out and maybe have been changed. We'll take guidance from that as we continue to build and look at examples as well.
So just a quick question about this with school psychologists, because school psychologists are generally for testing purposes and not for mental health purposes. So that seems to be two different things that we're talking about here.
So I would defer to Dr. Russell, but the meaning here is that it's more along the lines of mental health. So if it's school mental health professionals, would be a better word, then we could certainly make that adjustment.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. What Mrs. Evans-Brockett is describing is correct. The way that we are talking about a school psychologist in recent discussions is the type that conducts evaluations and not necessarily provides psychological services or counseling type services to students. So we would want to maybe call that out and distinguish. I understand why you incorporated that. However, their roles and responsibilities are a little bit different.
So just to be clear, it would be on the mental health side of things.
Right, it would. However, these individuals in our district don't typically serve to address mental health needs. They actually move students through evaluation processes. So, but maybe we can make a note on the slide, Jim, with a little bit more verbiage so that people understand what we're referring to here, and then we'll just initial it or something, date it.
Okay, absolutely. We'll make that change.
Dr. Russell and Mr. Weaver, may I add something here just with regards to that? Mrs. Evans-Brockett is correct. The way we use and the explanation we've just given with school psychologists, we have talked about, wouldn't it be great if we could use school psychologists in additional ways beyond just the testing? So that is certainly a goal of the district. If we can, move out of that where we're not conducting as much testing right now, that is the particular need. The only other thing I'd like to call out is that I believe we have currently 3 of our school psychologists that have been what's called prepare trained. And in those cases, they do assist across the county with school districts when there's crises type situations. I think most recently when Upper Perk School District experienced the suicide, our school psychologists that were trained did go and participate as part of that trauma intervention piece for staff and students. So there are moments when we support that mental health side. We would certainly love to expand upon that if we can get to a point where we can move beyond just that responsibility of the testing.
So, Dr. Boyd, to that point, assuming that we are back in school and a student or a teacher dies from coronavirus, are we going to be able to deploy resources? How I do worry that we are going to be stretched incredibly thin, and that the county resources for dealing with crises will likely be stretched thin.
You're right, Mrs. Lofton. I don't have an exact answer to that. What I can tell you is, yes, in crisis situations, we've often reached out to MCIU, and they will then reach out and then they will deploy resources. I guess none of us know what the future will hold with regards to coronavirus, and hopefully, we don't have districts facing crises such as that at the same time. But we do call upon our counterparts across other districts, and then we also go to the county. At times, we have not had to, but we also do have connections in other counties with like the CCIU, the BCIU. I would anticipate that if we would need supports, we could reach out and extend that umbrella even further than where we reach right now.
Kim, if you, as part of your county conversations with other directors of special ed, are districts talking about contracting these types of mental health services, or how are they talking about dealing with a crisis like a death from COVID-19? Have you had conversations about that?
We have not, Dr. Russell. I would say that the challenges and the conversations right now are about how do we return to school and how do we ensure that we're conducting the evaluations, the reevaluations, and that backlog that we have not been able to conduct. So just so this committee is aware, we do recognize that we have evaluations that we were not able to complete, that we will need to reissue, and so this is a big part of it. We, in addition to recognizing that we have a need based on the data we've collected, just around the number of evaluations, testing requests, et cetera, that compiled with and compounded by coronavirus and the pandemic, the school closure, and then the backlog of evaluations that need to be done. So we have not focused upon kind of that mental health or that crisis what if at this point. We're more focused on what we know is coming along.
So with the backlog of evaluations that will need to be done, is one person to start the school year enough? I know there are time constraints on how long we have to do testing and that sort of thing. So is it more effective to outsource a couple of people for the beginning months to get that backlog taken care of, rather than hiring one staff person?
And Dr. Russell, maybe you want to add something here. I don't know, you can let me know. What I did do is take a look over the last 4 years of data in terms of the numbers of evaluations that we've gotten, that we have come through. So it's new evaluations, it's reevaluations, it's gifted evaluations. So we broke it into those categories. And what we did is, with the help of Dr. Gibbons, her expertise, she was a former school psychologist. And what we were able to do is actually quantify the amount of time associated with each type of evaluation. And from there, we further broke down, the number of current students in special education. We looked back at the number of referrals that we've had, the types of evaluations we've conducted, times the number of hours that each one takes, and then analyzed the number of hours that a school psychologist works per year. And from that data, our psychologists are putting in well over the hours that they work, quite honestly. So they have really been, I'm going to say, burning the candle at both ends because of the timelines. So that in and of itself, without any regard for the backlog, is the data that is supporting this need for an additional school psychologist. Layer in coronavirus, that adds another challenge. Now we also have legal guidance with how to approach that. So that has been a big part of the conversation with county special ed administrators. How do we do that? What does that look like? How do we prioritize? And many districts are working with the staff they have. And as we see how that proceeds, then we'll determine whether or not we would need to maybe potentially contract additional services.
So it sounds like you're saying we have, even before coronavirus, we did have a need for an additional staff person. So you're recommending a full-time staff and then potentially contract services to help address the backlog?
Yes, and if you know, and I don't recall, we've had a lot of conversations, you know, over time since the closure. And I know there was a question that came up, I believe it could have been in our April board meeting, just around why the change in requests. And this was something that we began to look at. I don't know if you recall, I believe it was Mr. Cleland who spoke at, it could have been the March board meeting, maybe it was the February board meeting, and requested that we look at the psychologists. And that really prompted us to start to really gather and compile that data, take that deeper dive. And so this need or this recognition came about really after the pandemic and the school closure. So that was sort of in the works, and that's, you know, that was the analysis that we've been conducting.
Thanks, Dr. Boyd. Good conversation. The only other thing I would add is from maybe an HR perspective. Maybe Mr. Alabak can jump in here. You know, I do know that we're awfully sensitive to the fact that a lot of these jobs are part of the teachers union. And so we've got to work with our teachers union to ensure that we're not sending off union work to some other place. I don't know if we can have an agreement in place or something like that, or maybe because of the level of services that we're talking about, that is not an issue, but that is one area that I would be concerned about to make sure that everything is in order. Okay, so we'll make the change and maybe call it mental health professionals. From an additional perspective,
I'm sorry, I thought it was that we needed a school psychologist, not a mental health professional. Did I misunderstand that?
No. You're right, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. It is a school psychologist. That's what Dr. Boyd is aiming for. Somebody who can assist with the evaluations. That's what you're asking, right?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So this is not for the mental health issues. Nope. This is okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'll correct that with Mr. Weaver. Yeah.
Okay. So moving forward, one of the things that we do know that we will need in many of the scenarios that we talk about is additional staffing associated with custodial staff. We have come to the general conclusion, Mr. Clemmer and I, that at a minimum, we may need one additional custodian for each building. That is based upon the fact that we will need to do some sort of a midday cleaning of some sort. And again, that depends upon the schedule that is actually produced. We have had conversations internally in regards to bringing, for instance, a second shift person from second shift on to the daytime first shift as a start. In addition to that, so for instance, the education schedule in the elementary school may be that they're in all day. When they go out for recess, we will need to access that room and clean that room. That is not a deep cleaning. We are talking about if we want to wipe down the tables and the chairs, or if we want to go in with one of our fogging guns, for lack of a better word, and fog the room. We've got it down to a time frame of about 5 to 7 minutes to fog a room, and then it must sit for 10 minutes to dry. And if we choose to go in with our towels and clean everything, it'll take us about 10 minutes to get into the room, depending on the number of chairs, because we are in desks. We are thinking somewhere about 16 which that may change again, depending upon the guidance that comes from the state. And we might be able to do those desks in 10 minutes. Those will also need to dry as well for about 10 minutes. So we've got it down to each room will need about 20 minutes for us to clean, let it dry, and gain access again. The question is when can we do that in the middle of the day? If, for instance, in the elementary school, they don't go out for recess because it's raining, or if we somehow choose, and I'm not saying we have yet, if we eat in our classrooms, those children will never leave that room until the end of the day. That's a problem from a cleaning perspective. We all know when children aren't there, we can clean at night, we can deep clean at night. So if we take from the second shift and put them on the first shift, then we need at least one additional person to replace that particular custodian for the second shift so we can deep clean at night. If we choose to clean 3 times a day in high traffic areas, that will be a further burden on our existing custodial staff. Again, this is an example. We have not made up our mind. The idea is that the plan is developed, and then from that plan, we utilize the custodial staff that we have and do some unique things between second and first shift. And then the potential is there for our conversation tonight so that you can see what it would cost if we have to actually hire 7 custodians, one for each building.
Mr. Weaver, I did want to put out there and raise the question for you and Mr. Clemmer. There are times when we have food service employees who do not work a full day. They don't work a full-time shift or a full-time week. They're interested in the work as a part-time custodial staff member. Have we looked at the potential for bringing some of those individuals over into these roles on a part-time basis as we've done in the past? Is that an area that we can investigate a little bit more as opposed to maybe hiring 7 new staff members, which we may need to get to? But prior to that, I know there's been some strong interest in the past in that group.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, yeah, I know that they've done it for us in the past and they've done a great job. And that would help, especially since we don't know how long we will be doing whatever we're going to do in the beginning of the year. So I would say, yes, absolutely could see if they would be willing to work.
Yes,
So-
we had. I'm sorry.
So I'm just wondering, hopefully, eventually, at some point, we will not have to, we'll be able to return to something closer to normal. So if we hire these individuals, so what I'm wondering is, do we hire these individuals on as full-time employees? Can we hire people as temporary employees? Let's just say, in 6 months, we're back to something more resembling normal. And how do we want to explore having some segment of contracting services? I don't know if that's even something that we can do with our collective bargaining.
We had talked about that, Jim and I.
Okay.
Also, we could utilize subs, but lately it's been hard to get subs on a consistent basis. Maybe since the pandemic, that may have changed, but yes, we did discuss it a little bit.
Okay. Because it certainly sounds like this is something that is a need if we're going to have students in the building, but I do wonder about expanding, the long-term implications about expanding the staff at that level, and if it's something that can be done on a temporary and or contracted basis.
Mrs.
We've
Lofton,
done it before.
that's an excellent point. And we'll certainly make sure that we have that in our arsenal moving forward. The other thing is that, and it was briefly mentioned, this is a whole new animal, this whole COVID thing. So in the past, there have been cafeteria workers that have worked during the summer because they picked up additional work and some additional salaries. I don't know if they would be as willing, knowing that they would be custodian types going into specifically address potential COVID issues in classrooms. That might make them say, you know what, I'm not interested in that. And so again, as we talk about these things, we sometimes have this jackrabbit approach where we have some great ideas and then we just quickly say, oh no, but we don't know so many other variables. And Scott and I will often talk ourselves into circles about this very thing. So it's important that we get that out there. We have talked about outsourcing, bringing in an outsource service. We have experience with that in the early 2000s. That experience wasn't exactly pleasant at that particular time, but we did do that. The food service personnel coming in as that additional person during the day, that might work. However, if we are still a fully functional food service cafeteria group, even if we're doing bag lunch for 300 kids or whatever that may be, that might also dictate to us if we have the ability to do that or not. Right now.
Sorry, that was going to be my question, was about what additional responsibilities might already be on food services staff. Right now they're providing food for families Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I would assume even if we're in a hybrid model, we'll need to continue to provide food to kids on a daily basis, regardless of whether or not they're in school in some form. And then if they're not eating in the cafeteria, what additional staff do we need to get food to classrooms? And then lunch monitors, because our teachers are contracted to have a duty-free lunch. So I just wonder how much time the food services staff will actually have extra.
Right, Mrs. Evans-Brockett, that's a good point. My discussion with Mrs. Yaksich, she has been talking to colleagues in regards to this, and as is usual and typical in this day and age, everybody's all over the place. But yes, we have talked about a potential delivery service that would be necessary. And depending upon the schedule, it could be deliver 300 bag lunches, depending on what the building is and how many kids participate, all within an hour, which is going to be tough to do. But we'll have to create the plan and look at that, and that will be one of the variables that we need to seriously study. But
for the food service ladies that would want to work for us, it would have to be in the evening after their shift was over. That would be the only way it could really work. That's how it's worked in the past. And if we take somebody and we move them to day shift and we can plug one of those ladies in there in the evening, that would really help.
Again,
maybe you're going to address this in a future slide, but as we're thinking about this, what keeps popping in my mind, I don't know if anybody saw the policy statement from Mayor de Blasio in New York, where it's going to be 12 kids a class. So, are we thinking of any contingencies that if Governor Wolf comes back to us and says, here's the cap on class size? I mean, besides possibly dragooning every specials teacher or teacher on special assignment and putting them with students, space-wise, are we thinking about that as well too?
Yes, we are trying to think of those things.
Sorry, I know I just ruined your day, but
Well, no. It's like a cherry on top, Gene.
Realistically, that's probably what's going to happen. So I think I agree with Gene. We need to be ready for that.
Yeah, and which is one of the reasons we've suggested the hybrid, because as we lay out those desks in our classrooms, we can't get 20. We can only get 15. In some cases, the 12 that you're mentioning.
Some 12, yeah.
In some high school classes, it's 8, based on how they're structured and the size of them overall. So we did think about that, Dr. Hallis, and we're looking at it and considering it carefully as we think about how we're going to bring kids back. In which, in those 3 different modes we've been talking about. Yeah.
I think we kind of have to pretend we're Eisenhower and it's the D-Day landings. We've got to come up with every possible scenario to figure out when we get told when and how we can hit the beaches. We've got a plan that might work.
Yeah, I was sharing with Mrs. Smith and Dr. Boyd today. CDC is coming out with new opening school guidelines apparently this week sometime. maybe early next week. PDE is as well. So PDE is thinking by tomorrow or maybe early next week, if not. So we'll see what they indicate and the direction they're going to provide.
So Dr. Russell, if I may, this is the slide just on general operations. We did not add a slide for teachers because once you lessen the amount of students in a classroom, for instance, those other kids have to go somewhere else in that building. And so they also have to have a teacher. So I know teachers are awesome, but you can't split them in half and they can't be in two different rooms at once. But there might be a way with some sort of technology that we might be able to do that. Again, that's just out there as an idea. I don't know if that's possible, but you still have the question of classroom maintenance and making sure that the little Jimmy isn't in the corner picking on Susie, because that's what happens. So again, that's another piece of this. Again, I don't have a slide on that because it's so hard for us as in the operations side to comprehend what that means from an educational perspective.
No, and I get it, Jim. And what made me think of it was, as you're talking about needing to clean classrooms, I was trying to think of ways to do it. And I thought, well, because we're trying to keep the students isolated, you know, are we going to put art and other specials on a cart? And then if we're allowed to maintain our typical class size, then we might have rooms that are free, and it's not ideal, but on a rainy day, you could at least offset them to that classroom and go in and fog the classroom, and then let it dry and then bring the kids back. And it's not perfect, but you know, it enables a scenario. But then I thought of the mayor this morning in New York and 12 kids to a class. So just throwing it out there so that, you know, it's another thing we can think of.
Yeah, it's helpful.
So just back to what, I actually do like the idea of trying to have some opportunities for students to be outside. And, I was actually wondering, getting like some of those pop-up tents with picnic tables underneath them, or, with like two kids, to a picnic table so that like kids could have some time, or, maybe like a pavilion type of a thing or something, or even just having kids just go outside and sit on the ground, or just have some mats, like especially at the elementary level, having a little mats to sit on, and when the weather's nice out, kids can go outside and be spread out. So I mean, is that something that we're looking at? I know that was one of the things that the American Academy of Pediatrics was suggesting.
Sorry, I've talked a little bit with Mr. Weaver about, there's at least one other district who's renting tents that they can set up outside of one middle school, one high school, to increase their capacity at lunch so they can spread kids out. And these tents are heated and air conditioned. There are other ideas on the part of our principals to purchase tables for the purpose that you're describing, Mrs. Lofton, so they can go out and they can work or participate in a lesson that way. We haven't looked at mats. That's an interesting idea, so we can do that. But getting kids outside is something our principals are starting to talk more about and think about how they would do, how they would manage it.
Well, yeah, actually there are those those giant catering tents that you could get. I hadn't even thought about that, but that would be probably, they probably are available right now. And that might be a really great way to expand our space, and help spread students out more, and also have more outside time.
Yes.
Which, yeah, from everything I'm reading, it does not spread nearly as extensively in outdoor environments. Do we all agree that that's what the literature is showing?
Yeah, but would a tent that is field to provide air conditioning and heating really be an outdoor environment? Because
Yeah,
now
I was
you're
just gonna,
recycling the air.
Would be fine. I don't think
Probably not.
heat is relevant. I think being outside is.
And
Well,
I
I'm
know
not
both
envisioning
sets
a
of
camping
principals,
tent.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wasn't envisioning like a camping tent. I was just thinking, one of those almost like like a large circus tent, but without the sides.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. The literature's, the stuff I've read, and I know this is not an ideal model for a school district, but a local business, if you look, Brother Kirshner's Brewery, they have probably one of the most rigorous outside operations. And they've got, when people walk up, they have to wear a mask. They have to wear their mask till they sit down. They've got all the tables appropriately socially distanced, and they've got them under tents because it's summertime, but they're open on the side. So there's plenty of air circulating through. I mean, when you get to one of the things that's coming up, and I actually sat through a seminar on this recently for my own workplace, because I'm in charge of operations besides education, is you're going to see going into HVAC systems increasingly UV light sterilization modules. So it's actually just the UV lights that go around the whole air shaft, and as the air passes through, it gets hit with the UV light and sterilizes it, because there is some pretty significant, still debated, but there's increasing agreement that COVID can be spread through air systems.
Right, and we had been checking into that also. We also had like bipolar ionization tubes. We've had them installed at South, and they seem to work pretty good. We had talked about the UV lighting, but we still had some concerns, I guess a lot of the operation guys, about putting them in the larger units that the airspeed may be too fast for it to properly work. So they're still, investigating that to see if that'll work. But we had talked about putting bipolar ionization tubes in all the buildings. Jim did get a price on that too.
Yeah, we actually do have a slide a little bit later on to talk about that. Just gives some examples and some ideas about those things. Okay, so just so the Finance Committee understands, that's kind of how we're approaching staffing. Again, there is not a teacher one here. There's not one other, because a lot of that has to be driven by what our actual plan is. As long as you understand from the Finance Committee, and I can explain to the board, or you can explain to the public in general, or when parents ask, how did you come up with your figures and your plan? That's kind of how we're approaching it. We're also approaching it from an additional staff, which is I term non-school related. So these are not contractual positions. These are positions, whether they're through security or through STA contract, that they get paid by basically someone else. We pay them for the use of these positions. So if we look at security, depending upon the waiver, if we go forward with a waiver, we might need an additional security position at one building. And yes, we just utilize 6 hours per day. We don't know if we're going to need 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 2 in the middle to help for safety concerns, especially if we have, and we're encouraging students to go outside during the day. We will need additional staff to walk around, make sure that they are still safe. And that is an estimate based upon $24,702 for one position for all 179 days. I do know, and we can certainly create a contract that says, hey, if this stops and we go back to somewhat normal, we will no longer need that position. That's true. But again, we'll need to monitor and adjust. And of course, additional bus aids, we've added that to a transportation slide a little bit farther down as well, because of what COVID has done for our potential of transporting of our children, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So moving on to PPE and where we're at now, just as a general reminder, this would include cleaning and disinfecting supplies and equipment, mask, gloves, wipes, face shields for staff and potentially for students as well, or a mixture thereof, hand sanitizer and dispenser products, filters when we're considering moving from MERV 7 to MERV 13. However, now recently we've seen some guidance that they are actually considering MERV 17, which our systems do not handle MERV 17. That I can tell you because that came right from Mike Hansen. However, MERV 13 systems, we're purchasing some, and we're going to see what the impact is on our system. We believe they will work. We'll just have to, instead of doing them biannually, we'll have to do them quarterly and continue to monitor those. Plexiglass, of course, and additional signage to indicate social distancing, which is very important. And we understand from our operations group and the business administrators group that these signs are actually part of the social distancing, keep away 6 feet, wash your hands, all that kind of stuff. They are almost as important as following those basic rules. And right now, we have either purchased or we've placed purchase orders with the county, and we're working with one with the MCIU that exceed $150,000 already. This is essentially what we're looking at, is getting our potentially getting our students in the fall, and then reevaluating what our supplies are. So for instance, we have a stash right now ordered of about 50,000 masks. Those have not arrived yet. To put that into perspective, if we mandate everybody has to have a mask that enters our school for students only, that would last us less than 2 weeks. And those are at 43 cents for each one of those masks. So that is something that we are very concerned about. And again, our plan will drive that. And I think to Mrs. Lofton's point, as we've headed into the budget process, this is something that we'll have to do. And that will have to end up coming out of unassigned fund balance or covered by grants. But yet that's our expectation.
So, Mr. Weaver, are we requiring students to use the school masks, or, I mean, can students wear their own masks?
I would defer to Dr. Russell, but we have not set that in stone yet, or that's just a general discussion point. That's all.
I mean, I would think that we would want to allow students to be able to wear their own masks. I know we've seen many groups selling, Viking masks, and I did get an email question today about whether you can have masks with political statements on them. If we're going to have some mask guidelines, but I can't imagine. Well, I would think it would be a really good idea to allow people to wear their own masks if they choose, because, I've got the masks that I think are most comfortable. Other family members don't like, and they like ones that make me nuts. And, I would think that we would want people to be able to select within certain guidelines something that they're going to be as comfortable as possible with.
So Judy, well, I don't agree. I don't disagree, but I mean, some masks are more effective than others. I mean, there's a lot of literature out there that says, bandanas do one thing while N95s do another. I mean, I think we need to give direction on what's going to be most effective. I don't know where we're going to get that direction from. I mean, CDC or county or wherever.
The governor.
Right. Oh, sorry.
The governor did include some details in his order around masks, and he's actually, or I'm sorry, it's Dr. Levine, excuse me. There is a fair amount of latitude in the masks, and right now in some other conversations we've been having with administrators and staff, we're right now leaning towards following that order and allowing students to wear their own mask, but just as maybe they need a backup sweatshirt or something during the school year, we would have masks on hand so that students would be provided one in the event they didn't have one.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I'm coming at this from a different direction because, I mean, when I go to work, I have to wear 2 masks. So
yeah,
for students, it's
Well, you're also going to have elementary students that leave it on when they're taking a drink of water and it gets wet, or they sneeze in it, or, so you're going to need replacement masks throughout the day as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think the other thing is depending upon our transportation guidelines, you know, and I think we're leaning this way. Dr. Russell, please tell me to stop if I'm not. You know, parents and guardians will certainly have to do their part, and they won't be able to get on the bus unless they have a mask. So the group of students that get on the bus, if we provide busing, they will already have to have their mask on when they get to into the bus. The concern, as Mr. Clemmer and I talked about this, as well as with Dean Miller, just as a side note, you know, if we encourage people to be driven by their parents, what are the odds that little Jimmy forgot his mask and just says, oh, the heck with it, you know, I'm just going to go in and they're going to give me one anyway. That's what we're thinking very quickly, unless we have the guidelines that are very specific. You know, those 50,000 masks could be wiped out essentially in 3 or 4 weeks if people just react that way. I'm not saying they will, but you know, sometimes I'm a Debbie Downer and I start thinking, oh my God, they're spending all of our money on masks.
Well, I think that it just has to become an expectation. I mean, you just need to know that you have to wear your mask. I mean, I don't think any of my children have ever forgotten to wear shoes to school. You know, it's just they've gotten in the car barefoot, and we've gone other places without shoes and not realized that we got there. But they know that they need to put their shoes on to go to school, and so you just know that you're going to need to put your mask on to go to school. And I think that we need to just really set that as an expectation.
Dr. Russell, can we create some sort of PSA to put out on Facebook and other mediums to show proper mask wearing and the reasons why? I mean, I'm seeing some pretty, I want to say funny, but it's a bad example, videos on Facebook of what school looked like when people put masks on, you know, especially K-12. Is there any talk about changing the curriculum as far as through wellness or other ways to at least teach them why they're doing it if the parents fail to do it?
You know, we haven't incorporated that yet, but I appreciate the idea. We can certainly, there's lots of educational videos out there about how to wear a mask and not to touch it and things like that, cover the nose and the mouth. So we can work on that and post some of that to inform people, and then talk a little bit more about how we educate. I think there's going to be a lot of coaching on the part of our teachers to their students this year that sounds different, that looks different, washing their hands more frequently, staying 6 feet away, not touching, you know, young children, they like to be close sometimes. That's going to be hard, wearing their masks. So I think there's going to be a lot of coaching and education like that. So I think it's a good point. And we're trying to figure out how and when we incorporate it. So yeah, but we can definitely educate our community on masks a little bit more.
And I think we need to do it before school starts, if at all. You know, I think if we're going to get the kids back in the classroom and the teachers, we need to at least educate them sooner rather than later.
Right. Well, that makes sense too. Yeah. Yeah.
Are they allowing more heavy duty disinfecting stuff now? Because I know, you know, in the past it's been very, like, there's very strict standards about what you can use in the school. Are they loosening that at all to allow deeper cleaning?
Well, not really. The products that we're using are approved by the CDC. So, you know, they're not really loosening up their standards.
Like, are we allowed to use bleach?
They did say in emergencies, if they didn't have anything, that school districts could do that. But you really have to be careful with that.
Wasn't it 10%? That was the limit.
I think it was 10%. Yeah.
That's what I read.
But we have, you know, we've ordered enough chemical that we think we should be in pretty good shape.
At least to open up school to get us through a couple of months and to try to figure out where we're at.
Yeah, or until they change the guidelines and tell us you need something else.
Right. Actually, I don't know if Mrs. Lofton, I think you were on it. Kim Mayer sent an email about chemicals and what chemicals we were using, and if they were on the, what was it, the list N on the American Academy or Academy of Pediatrics.
Pediatric.
Isn't there an FDA list of approved chemicals? I'm forgetting exactly what it's called. Oh, but there's like a chemical safety, like approved chemicals. I forget. Yeah, I forget what the list is called, but
There's one from the Academy of Pediatrics.
Yes.
And the other we typically use is from the EPA if our products are on their list.
That's it. It's an EPA list. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And our products that we use are on that list.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And we were double checking to make sure that the chemicals that we've purchased and we were using are on that list N on the pediatrics list, and they are.
Now, is that mandated to us what we're allowed to use, or is that just what we choose to use?
It's not mandated, but we're trying to follow all the guidelines from the EPA and CDC about what will kill corona. I mean, there's thousands of chemicals out there, different chemicals, but you know, most of them won't kill that. And you have to make sure that you're going to use something that's approved to kill it.
Right.
Otherwise,
The reason
waste
why
more money.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, the reason why I was asking is I recall that the American Academy of Pediatrics had specific guidelines regarding cleaning materials. So, but I don't remember exactly what they are.
There is some contradiction between the AAP and the EPA about chemicals to use, because the EPA is looking at everyone from senior citizens to children.
Mm-hmm.
The AAP is only looking at kids from 19 or less. So they're two different lists. So I think we need to make sure we're looking at both of them.
Well, yes, but I think I would hope that the pediatric list would be more stringent because when you're developing, you're more susceptible to chemical insults.
Well, no, it is more stringent. That's why I'm saying.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I missed.
I think that's not. I think we need to use the AAP guideline versus the EPA.
Okay, agreed.
I think the other thing
And
is
we'll make
real,
sure that ours are on that.
Yeah, they are, because Mrs. Mayers asked me, and I did provide proof of that. The other thing is that we generally look at, Scott, what do you call it? It's got to be food
service grade, so that could be used in cafeterias and kitchens.
Yes.
Scott and Jim, I'll send you a list. I actually have one in my email right now from
Okay.
AAP. And food grade just means whether if it comes in contamination with food, that it won't hurt anyone.
Right.
Okay. All right, so that's basically where our PPE costs are now. Now, if we suddenly change up the schedule and it goes a little bit different than what we're anticipating, those costs may go down or those costs may go up, and we'll plan accordingly. Okay, so some of the other things that we're talking about, and we're trying to get estimates and costs so we can at least consider them. The bipolar ionization we had talked about. We did get a quote, a rough quote from Mike Hansen from CM3. It would cost us about $1.3 million to outfit all of our units, all of our HVAC units with bipolar ionization equipment. UV lights are less expensive, and we're looking at that, and we've asked some people to give us some options on those, but we don't have anything to share at this point in time. And again, as you're well aware of, as you are doing at the board level and as Dr. Russell's doing at the administrative level with superintendents, there's an awful lot of ideas and options that we're looking at. But remember, a lot of these will be driven by whatever the educational schedule will be, and we will have to adjust accordingly. Transportation. So when we look at transportation, we have some solid numbers here because we're just doing some basic calculations. If we limit our busing to 2 students per seat with masks, that's only 48 students on a 72 passenger bus. We are being told that in order to enforce is the wrong word, but to mandate that the children maintain their masks on, STA is seriously considering, and we would seriously be considering, the addition of an aide on every bus. We have about 70 buses with the addition of the 11 based upon the calculation. So again, some buses already have aides. We didn't get that detailed, but if there's an aide on every bus, because of the mask enforcement, again, strong word, that would be almost $1 million to add to this conversation. The basic buses at the current rates, we would need to add 11 buses. And again, we'd have to pick up and drop off, and we'd have to fix the schedules. This is just assuming the same schedule as last year would be applied just with 48 students on every bus. We would have to pay an additional $593,122. There is an additional cost for gas, not included in that because we purchased the gas for our buses. And so it really depends upon, and those numbers will fluctuate based upon if a hybrid model, if we go into yellow and we go hybrid, or if we go into yellow and we go all virtual, or we're completely virtual. Obviously, those numbers will change and savings will occur if we don't have to make up those days. If we are forced to go to 180, and I know that guidance just came out the other day where we might be able to get a waiver for that, then we might actually have some savings. And the last point, bullet point, is that remember, that will also impact subsidy reimbursement. So the more cost for transportation as it currently stands, the following year, we would get about 25% of those costs in some sort of a form of a subsidy reimbursement in our transportation subsidy. They may change the variables in the future like they've been doing, but generally speaking, we would expect with additional expenses in 1 year, then next year the subsidy would go up.
Mr. Weaver, have we looked at staggering start times in ways that, for example, middle school and high school could, just as we utilize the same buses for elementary and secondary, they just have two different sets of runs. Can we split our buses across 3 runs? So, for example, spaced out the start of elementary, middle, and high school enough that, or then I guess my other question is, do we need to, how much do the buses need to be disinfected between each run? And then my other question is, and I think I mentioned this last night, but if we do hybrid at the high school, we can essentially double the number of students who park and potentially really cut back on some of the busing needs at the high school.
Okay, so first question. We looked at staggering the bus times not associated with COVID, but about 1.5 years ago, I believe, as we were talking about expenses. And I think we tasked Emma Trauger and STA to look at what a staggered bus, not just 2, but a 3, as we were talking about start times. So that information exists. It's just not COVID related. As if the question is just about COVID, no, we have not asked about that. I am sure if we had a plan and we knew exactly what buildings were coming in and what students were coming in, then yes, we could hand that off to STA and we could say, this is what we expect. We could get that for you, but we don't have that.
Well, we're going to need to, I'm sorry. They're going to need to set bus schedules in
Pretty
about
soon, yes.
Really soon. So, I mean, we do need to have that.
Absolutely. And what they will tell us is, okay, give us details. When does school start? What school building are you going to? Are you doing elementary or are you doing secondary? What about the middle school? And then once we give them particulars, they can play all day. And remember, it's a software computation. So they just put in some times and some dates and how many buses they have, and then they will be able to create some sort of a schedule. Once we get that schedule, then we'll be able to look at that and see if that's even feasible. Because it might kick out that if we go 3 staggered runs, that would free up buses. That might be able to help us. If we stay with 2 and we aren't able to hit upon transportation waivers, for instance, then we don't get that relief that we desperately need in going from 3 kids to a seat to 2 kids to a seat. Then it becomes untenable if we need 30 more buses. Maybe
Okay,
they.
so
in their
Ms. Weeds,
inventory.
I'm just going to interrupt you because in 2 business days we have to vote on a plan, and I just have to say it concerns me that we haven't asked STA to do the modeling for us yet.
So, Mrs. Lofton, if I could just offer that the details of the plan at that level are not actually what you're going to be asked to approve. It's a template from PDE that prompts a lot of questions. We have to work out these details, absolutely. However, the level of detail from the state anyway at this point in time is not what's expected yet.
Okay, well, that's reassuring because it's making me a little bit nervous.
Well,
The calendar just seems to be speeding by, and I'm yeah.
And I mean, to your point, we have talked about with the team of principals staggering 15 minutes even for primary grades versus upper elementary for their drop-offs or neighborhoods. Some come at 8:30 and some come at 8:45. So we are starting to talk about that. But you're right. There's lots of details that we really have to get going on. Time is marching on.
We have to accept this might change in 30 days.
Mhm.
I mean, the state might step in and change everything.
Agreed. Well, does STA have 11 buses sitting there waiting to be put into service? Did they actually
They
physically
have
have
a reserve of 10, at least 10. Not sure if they have the drivers for them though, at this point, but they would have 10 in reserve.
Okay. So the maximum, and I assume it's not really possible to get more school buses within the time frame that we need to?
I wouldn't say it's impossible. They might be able to bring them from other districts if they have them.
Right.
They're not all in the same position we are. But Emma said she did have 10, and I think that's what our contract calls for, them to have at least 10 spares.
So it sounds like we might want to start investigating the possibility of, getting more physical buses. Because if we're planning to use all 10, then we're not going to have any spares when there's a mechanical failure.
Right. I can reach out to her tomorrow.
Yeah.
I did talk to her a little bit about, our concern with, were they going to have enough bus drivers when we come back? And she said that she was encouraged that most of her older bus drivers really want to come back to work.
Okay, good.
And we thought that would be the opposite, but it hasn't been. So I can reach out to her tomorrow and discuss getting more buses or having the availability, to us.
Yeah, right. I mean, it would just be helpful to know what, if there are, if we have limitations that say we're only able to get all our students to school 2 days a week, we need to know that. Or we need to know like how many parents need to commit to driving, or students need to commit to driving to make it feasible. Because I'll say I think 2 students to a seat, unless they're siblings, that's still awfully cozy.
So part of the survey question was, would you be willing to drive your kids to school? Is there a way to capture that in a database to show how many people are actually willing to do that? That'll give us a finite number of how many buses we need, how many seats we need, how many runs we need.
Well,
Yeah, we are thinking about personalizing a survey that goes out after the community message meeting next week, where what we're trying to do is send a survey question to parents for each of their children and ask them to be specific about whether or not they're comfortable with the traditional attendance at school. You know, I'm concerned about that with elementary and middle school students. I'd really like to have them back in school. High school's a little more challenging. Are they comfortable with or willing to send their child back into a hybrid situation or a virtual? And then we also want to ask about that transportation. The challenge is, as Mr. Subers mentioned, we have to be ready to accommodate anybody. So even though we might get, and we had a pretty good percentage in that first survey we sent of individuals who said, yeah, I'd be willing to drive my child or ride with somebody who drives to school. His opinion is we have to be ready. You know, we can't bank on that necessarily, but I think we'll get a good idea if we personalize the survey and ask that specific question.
I mean, honestly, most community members that reached out to me said they'd be willing to drive their family. I know that's a small sample size, but I know I am. I know every family we've talked to is willing to. So it'd be nice to capture that, at least have an idea of how many people are willing to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had a pretty good response in that first survey. So, you know, that I think to that point, people's interest in driving their children to school is going to create that traffic flow we talked a little bit about last night with drop off and pickup. That looks a little bit different than the traffic flow we're addressing typically with buses. So, but it's nice to hear that people would be willing to do that. Absolutely.
So I think STA does about 81 bus runs every day on a normal day. And so some of those other bus runs as well, private, parochial, if we provide transportation for our students, we also have to provide transportation for their students. So once we get ours set up, STA then has to go into their bubble and figure out what they're doing with those runs as well. So this is the number one topic, really, amongst business administrators. Trusting educational decisions to the educational side of schools, operations, but transportation is the number one issue. The question is, how do you do that? And there is no right answer at this point in time. We are looking at, so you would consider that everybody's trying to work together. Well, early on, the thought process was that we would protect our drivers and put some sort of a plexiglass thing around the drivers. They even went so far as to say that perhaps like a shower curtain type of thing. And the Pennsylvania State Police, who inspects all of our buses, basically said, anything around the driver, we will not approve the bus. So that's their stance right now. That may change, but for right now, they've said, we won't approve the bus if you do that. Now that kind of runs counter to everything we've been talking about with safety. So that might be yet another one that we might want to watch out for as well.
We'll have to wear masks, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, again, transportation, we're trying to do the best we can with the information that we have to try to develop some sort of a dollar figure to consider. So any other questions on transportation? I know there's a lot. We don't have many answers. Okay, so just to summarize, what we're looking at now is these numbers right here. And again, they're all subject to change depending upon our circumstance, what color we're in, what model we're in from an educational perspective, whether it's 100% in-person, hybrid, or full virtual models. Those dollars, and again, they're subject to change as we change our plan and figure out additional costs. Again, I know Mrs. Lofton had mentioned that the expectation from PSBA and PASBO has been about, the impact has been about $2 million. I would say we're kind of in there, right along that line, and a little bit over in some instances. So to help offset these items, remember we have grant opportunities with FEMA for the PPE supplies. Again, the vast majority of the PPE supplies right now, we will submit to the grant, to FEMA and PEMA, and hopefully they'll respond with a dollar for dollar reimbursement. Other grant opportunities, well, the second round of the state COVID, the $50 million that's being withheld, that would generate another $150,000 for PVSD in a second round, so to speak, in the fall. We expect to have a COVID reserve, which would be ideal for us to address some of these one-time costs. And that gets back to the conversation about hiring people. Can we make them temporary employees so that they are not still here when they are not needed? Unaudited, we expect between $2.3 to $2.5 million. And remember, we're utilizing some of that to balance our budget for 2021. And then we also have unassigned general fund balance, which is estimated to be about $9 million. Again, that's unaudited, subject to Carl Hogan's final numbers, and then we'll have real numbers to talk about that. But overall, next year, the 2021 year, seems to be a lot of unknowns. If it continues into 21-22, the question of longevity associated with the impact of economics on our ongoing fund balances, the $9 million figure sticks out there, and hopefully we might be able to work some of those dollars into a budget if they would continue for 21-22 under our Act 1 resolution or with exceptions. And that's kind of what we've got for tonight. Again, just general ballpark numbers out there meant to stand out there in the bullpen when the final plan, when the detailed framework plan is in place, we can get to work with finalizing some of those numbers, those estimates, and get a game plan for dollars associated with the plan.
How about classroom supplies, since they're saying every student should have their own set of supplies? Have we looked at what additional needs we might have there?
I know some of the principals have talked about that, but I have not. I don't have a number for that. No. We could.
Well, I think that's going to be a cost we're going to see, so I think we need to definitely look at that.
I know some things they have, typically scissors, those types of things. If you're talking elementary school, the supplies are a little bit different at the secondary level. So again, depending upon what the hybrid looks like, what the virtual looks like, and what in-person looks like under COVID, that would drive some of those costs. So you're right, we should take that into consideration.
And I believe there was a question last night from an elementary art teacher, because like our specialized teachers wouldn't have separate supplies for each student, and there wouldn't necessarily be time to sanitize them in between classes using them.
Correct. So that would be something we'll generate and we'll have in our back pocket. Okay, I think that's it for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Okay, before we close out, a couple comments coming through the Q&A. So, and they're all three from Mr. Liggett. So the first, Perkins Township, the first one asks, have we considered having students clean their own desks like the Japanese do? So, part of me wondered with the sanitation, if we have every student have, their container of Clorox wipes on their desk, and it's the student's responsibility, it's just part of their expectation. Like, okay, you're going to get out your pencil, and while you're at it, wipe your desk with Clorox, with your Clorox wipe. I mean, can we do something like that? Have we thought about how, that can be worked into just a regular part of the routine?
I clicked on it tonight, and I think it's a great idea, but how do we hold them accountable? I mean,
Yeah.
as far as from a liability standpoint, if they're not doing it to code or whatever.
from the CDC guidelines I looked at, they don't encourage having children do that because of the chemical and the chance that they would use it improperly. Most of the chemicals we use, probably all of them, have keep out of reach of children right on the labels. So we really have to be cautious about that.
Okay. Let's see. The next question is, or I guess it's more of a statement. It says, having students wear a mask that they are familiar with will help increase usage. Cloth masks are allowed by the PA Department of Health. And the last one says, Jim, remember, we cannot force masks because of the medical exemption that requires no injury. We can offer masks to those who don't have one. Well, actually, I keep wondering about this. And I believe, I can't remember if it was an email or a public comment that we received, but, I think there's actually very few medical reasons why somebody wouldn't be able to wear a mask. And so I think we do need to be thoughtful in our requirements around mask wearing. But
Judy, the point was that Dr. Levin had said that just a statement from them saying that I'm exempt is enough, that we can't require a medical note. So people could make up any reason. I mean, you've seen how politically charged wearing masks is, and the parents' page has been blowing up in the last couple of days with people saying that they won't have their kids wearing a mask. So we don't hold any power in enforcing that.
Well, okay, that confuses me, and I don't know the timing of that statement, because didn't the guidance that come out last week say students have to wear masks?
It did. And I mean, Sarah's right. It's turned into a political club, and it shouldn't be. I mean, unfortunately, there's been a lot of data that's come out that said that wearing a mask is not to track people with asthma, people with allergies. I mean, you heard Mrs. Lewis last night. You get just as much oxygen through a mask as you do without it. So I think, we might have to make a board policy that requires it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally strongly believe if you're going to be in school, you need to have a mask on.
Absolutely.
But Dr. Russell, can our board policy supersede what the state has said?
I don't think so. And I think Mr. Subers may have mentioned this. I sort of compared it to vaccines. Our students are expected to be vaccinated when they start school, but they can opt out. So all kids have to be vaccinated when they start school, except if they have a religious exemption. And the order includes that very last statement, as you mentioned, that says if for some reason they don't want to wear masks, they don't have to. So there are lots of questions about the authority we have to actually enforce that based on that order.
I mean, I've never read anything that there's religious exemption to wearing a mask, though. Vaccines, I'll defer, but.
Yeah, just as an example of a way out, if you will, it seems as if there is also a way out for individuals who, for whatever reason, can't wear a mask or don't want to wear a mask. And I don't know, it's a good question for Mr. Subers again in public. I don't know what our authority could be as a school district to hold kids to doing it.
Well, right, because aren't guidelines, I mean, unless it's actually a law, like at what point is it an order versus a guideline? Because guidelines are not, they don't carry the force of law.
I think it would be a good question to ask him.
Okay, yeah. All right.
And hear his explanation for that.
Okay. Okay. Good. Let's see. So where are we here? Public comments on any topic. Well, that was a nice segue then. Okay. Next we have our meeting scheduled for 2020, 2021. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, the 10th. Is that Thursday, September 10th?
Yeah, let me make that a little bit bigger for you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so our next meeting is Thursday, September 10th. And are we anticipating needing to add a August meeting? Or are we comfortable, or is this I guess the next step will be to report things at your August board?
Jim, do you think we're going to need an August meeting for finance?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we play it by ear, and then, you know, potentially we'll just like with everything else, we'll just have to see what happens and where we are, and if there's something that we need to discuss, then I trust Dr. Russell will let us know.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's see. Public comments on any topic. Oh, I see a couple more comments came in. Let's see. Where are we? We cannot ask why. Thank you, Sarah. You are correct on my thoughts. And then lastly, and I'm sorry, this is all from Mr. Liggett of Perkins Township. And he says, this is why we need to have a social movement to wear masks. We should have the Viking logo have a mask. Oh, that's a cute idea. I like that. We need to do a little branding with a Viking logo with a mask on. Okay. That could be very helpful. All right. So last but not least, 4.02 meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.